And we are live.
Welcome to the Contrarian Daily Podcast. We have an action-packed episode for you today. I hope the week's been awesome. Lots happening in our country, lots happening in the world, and we're here to share it all with you. I have two strange-looking men to the left of me here. We have Jake and Chris. How are we doing, boys?
Yeah, not too bad, mate.
Look, I don't know who you're looking at, but we're on your right. So,
you're on my screen, you're on my left.
Yeah.
So here we go. So we've got awesome guests on tonight. We've got a lot happening in Australia. I've been speaking to a lot of people because, of course, we've got our event coming up on the 20th of Feb, which is going to be phenomenal, the Global Freedom Rally. If you're watching this and you want your free tickets for the Global Freedom Rally, head on over to globalfreedomrally.com and secure them. Share it with your friends, share it with your family. We've got some incredible speakers. Dr. Peter McCullough's going to be there all the way from the US. It's going to be insane. And of course, we're going to be there speaking too. But how has your week been, lads? What's been happening with you?
Mate, everything and nothing, all happening. How about you, Chris?
I've been very, very busy. Basically, I got my copy of The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab hard copy and also his next book called The Great Narrative. So I've been digging into those books and making a lot of notes, and we'll be releasing some recorded videos there soon.
Hats on and deep diving.
100%. So I've been very, very busy just reading those books and trying to keep across all the updates of what's going on. Obviously, we've got the convoy in Canberra as well. I've actually got a bunch of friends who are just heading down from here in Queensland, so they'll be going down for this weekend, and I'm trying to figure out if I can make it with them. But regardless, I wish them well and wish everyone well who's down there right now as well. They're doing a great job.
Awesome. Yeah, look, it looks phenomenal up there. Spoke to Stephen Shavura today, Dr. Stephen Shavura. He said it's absolutely phenomenal. He said it's a great environment, really clean, lots of families down there. It's good energy and no violence. So that's exactly what we want. It's the only way we're going to get our message across. So hats off to everybody who is down there and fighting the good fight still. And speaking of which, we have someone on tonight that has been fighting the good fight for over 2 years now, going hard, and is continuing to fly the flag for small business, for people that have been struggling in Victoria, and is none other than Carlz Soda. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me.
So good to have you on board. And you're also going to be speaking at the Global Freedom Rally.
Yeah, back again. I'm glad you invited me back.
We can't wait to have you speak, and you're going to obviously steal the show like last time. How's things been with you lately?
Not too bad, mate. I've actually relocated. I'm back up in the city, which is interesting. As you know, I've been in regional Victoria down on the South Coast during the whole of the pandemic, and it just felt like it was the right time to sort of come back. And the weird thing is I've only been here 3 weeks, and I've been back in the CBD and out and about, and it's so different to regional for many reasons. And seeing our CBD the way it is, it just breaks your heart.
Yeah, it's been crazy. I mean, I've been going back down to Melbourne as well and just seeing how many businesses are shut. The city is absolutely dead. It truly has taken its toll. Have you noticed an energy and I guess a psychological shift in the people of Victoria?
Yeah, and it really, it's like there's different clusters, right? Like you got people like myself who from the get-go knew something was up and wasn't on board with the hysteria and the fear. You've got people who along the way, they're all at different phases of sort of, I don't want to say waking up because I feel like that's also a bit passive aggressive, but the different phases of sort of recognizing that there's something wrong. And then you got people who are absolutely still freaking terrified, driving with their masks on and things like that. And we're also coexisting in this really weird space, and it makes for some interesting people watching.
Very, very true. I was actually in the city the other day. I'm waiting at the lights, and you've got this guy who's delivering Uber Eats or something on my left. He's got his helmet completely undone, and he starts riding, and he's frantically trying to put his mask on rather than fix his helmet. I'm thinking, this is where people's priorities are. This is how crazy the situation is, where he thinks he's going to be safer riding on a freaking busy road, putting a mask on, than doing up his helmet.
Some of the things you see in Melbourne, it's crazy. Like, I'm wondering if, Carlz, if you've ever seen anything totally absurd as well, because when I was living in Melbourne before I left in July of 2020, and I used to see people doing what I call the windmill. If you're walking and you walk near somebody, they do this. and they windmill to try and make sure that people are 1.5 away from them. I saw that happen on multiple occasions
That was
in the
just for
flesh.
you then, mate.
Could have been me.
I haven't seen that, but I think this is actually quite common because I've seen a meme about this now. But I've seen the smoker, so the person with the mask up, pulling it down to have a ciggy, and then putting it back up in between puffs, and I'm like, I want to say something, but I'm like, dude, you're literally burning your lungs out with carcinogens, but you're worried about a virus. Like, priorities, champ, you know?
So very true. It is a crazy time, and I think people have gone a little bit crazy over this period, and hopefully everyone comes out of it safe and sound. But look, we're still in the fight, and there's still a lot to be done, and a lot to change in the country with elections coming up, etc., and restrictions still on. But let's rewind a little bit, because I think your story's quite unique. There's been ups and downs and a whole lot that's happened with you. And for people that are watching, they may not know your full story. But I remember when it was the first night you actually heard from me. I was laying on the couch. We went into it must have been the second lockdown in Victoria, I think. And you did a video on Instagram, and it went absolutely viral. You did a massive rant, and I watched it, and I was fuck yes, that's exactly what needs to be said. I got straight into your DMs, and I was like, hey, hats off to you, good work. Gave you a shout out, and obviously it just went crazy from there. How many views did you end up getting on that video?
40 million.
Wow.
Jeez. Whoa.
Crazy. So, like, literally, that's the epitome of a viral video. It went absolutely crazy. What was it like for you? Obviously, normal, everything going on, and then boom.
Do you know what? It was interesting because, like, I'm not someone that is shy sharing her opinion, and I've been outspoken this whole time. I became quite vocal, I think, around April in 2020, because I was one of those people. My story is a bit unique, and depending who you are and depending what you've heard, you may have preconceived notions, but for the sake of clarity, I feel like I sort of have to start from the beginning. I won't bore you too long, but I was in a sort of transition in 2019. I was winding down a business and working as a subcontractor to an agency as a photographer. And, keeping that very quiet because you don't want people to know when you're closing a company. And, there's a bit of ego there on my end and all that sort of stuff. And so I ended up coming into the pandemic in a very unstable position already, having closing a business and whatnot. And the agency, from the second they were talking about lockdowns, they let me go, because every big business was straight away tightening the purse strings. That was their first reaction. And, unless you've owned a business, most people don't understand, the bottom line and what precautions need to be taken in a business. Particularly the bigger the business, the more safe you need to be. It's like steering the Titanic. Really poor example of a ship, but you know what I mean. Right, that can quickly maneuver itself. So yeah. I was let go from the agency in March 2020. So the whole of March, when everything, like, borders are shutting and they're discussing maybe doing JobKeeper and, what are they going to do? Like, all these people getting laid off, like Qantas staff. I was one of those people that was like, no, seriously, what do I do? Like, I was living paycheck to paycheck. And that was when the news was putting up things about Centrelink queues being 1 kilometre long. And I was like, I've had a business for the last 15 years. The idea of standing in a Centrelink queue, I was like, I cannot do that. Like, that's not what I'm about. Anyway, fast forward, 2020 was rough. None of us had been in a lockdown before. None of us knew what we were expecting. And Melbourne copped it the worst. And I became quite vocal because it was very clear to me that this was political. I'm all for health, and I'm all for making sure that our vulnerable people are taken care of. There's obviously precautions we can put in place, but like blanket politics really infuriate me. And that's, kind of what the ALP do, right? And then anyway, fast forward into 2021, we're up to lockdown 4, or we'd just come out of lockdown 4, and I had lost it. So essentially 2020, I had been doing the bare minimum to survive, surviving with the bare minimum, I should say, and JobKeeper. Now, as people know, JobKeeper was like $3,000, which sounds like a lot of free money. But when your rent or your mortgage is like $2,000 a month, $1,000 to live off to pay bills, and it's not much, right? And most people who were living on JobKeeper were people who had decent jobs, like a pilot or something like that. You know, their lifestyles couldn't be supported by this. And that's not to sound greedy. That's just realistic. You know, you live within your means of what you're used to averagely earning. So 2021 came around and I had secured a really good job opportunity, like a huge retainer with a client. And it was just constantly put on pause because of lockdowns and that instability in the hospitality sector. Anyway, I lost it at lockdown 5. I think that was May. Forgive me, they all just roll into one, but somewhere around May. And I was speaking to my client. They're like, we're so sorry. Like, obviously, we're going to have to postpone again, which means I wasn't getting paid. And at this point, JobKeeper, I think it decreased to like $1,500 or something. It was a lot smaller. And I was like, I cannot live like this. And I just sat down like I normally do some Instagram stories. And this time I did it as an IGTV. It wasn't planned. I didn't know what I was going to say. I just went, bleh. And I guess that's the thing when it's authentic, right? It just comes out. And I think that's why it resonated with people. I wasn't scripted. I wasn't trying to get clicks and likes. I was just literally venting. And as you said, so many people went, fuck, this is exactly how I feel. And that's how you get 40 million views. Not because you try, but because you are authentic, you know?
Mm-hmm. So very true. And it was super authentic. It was full of passion and energy and anger and all of those things. And we were all feeling it. As I said, I remember laying there watching that thinking, fuck, thank God someone's just come out and said this, because around that time, so much has happened during this time, but I think people forget around lockdown 4 and 5, it was still, you shouldn't, like, everyone was going after people that were talking against the narrative, anything different, you're fucking crazy. And then you obviously went out, you've gone viral. But what we also then saw after that was you were one of the first to get absolutely attacked by media and the outside. And, you know, you were the first of many. Anna Rose has just been relentlessly attacked and so many others. And it was just absolutely insane. How was that journey for you? We won't go too much into it because it's a bit crazy, but how was that journey for you? You know, how did you feel going through that?
It was interesting because, to be honest, like so I actually did 3 videos that went viral. The one that we were just talking about was the 3rd. But prior to that, I did another video where I was a little bit more reserved and I did have a script and I was reading it. And I was calling out the ALP's policies. Basically, I'm going to, forgive me, I'm going to get the numbers wrong because it was a while ago now. But I think the ALP came out saying that they were giving $750 million to small businesses and sole traders because for the whole of 2020, sole traders were not eligible for any support. Now, sole traders could be someone like a local plumber who just has himself and may have a warehouse where he stores all his stuff, or a sole trader could be a wedding photographer who still earns maybe $150,000, $200,000 per year, but they're just themselves. They work from home because they go obviously off to wedding shoots. And so it was wild to me that people who had legitimate businesses, legitimate jobs were being completely overlooked. Anyway, and then lockdown 4 or 5, whatever happened, they announced the $750 million for business support. When I looked at like the eligibility criteria, I noticed again that you weren't eligible for it unless you had a commercial lease. So unless you were renting a property other than your home, you weren't eligible for this payment, which is fucked because there's 400,000 sole traders in Victoria and only 31,000 of them were eligible. And I just saw red. And so I put that video up and that was the first one to go viral. I think that one got like 500,000. And that started a bit of a media chain because obviously at this point, as you said, people were very scared to go against them. No, I shouldn't say scared. I feel like that's the wrong word, but people were hesitant because, you know, there still was a bit of iffiness around the virus. Like, how deadly was it? We hadn't got the vaccine yet and all this sort of stuff. So people didn't want to go out and talk about the virus as such. But, you know, I was in a safe space because I was talking about blanket policy. And there was a big media chain from that. I went on the Today Show. I went on Sunrise. I went on Sky. And as you can tell, I'm not bad at talking. So they invited me back a couple of times. And I think, I mean, forgive me, I might sound wildly arrogant here. I'm sure I'll be accused of being a narcissist for this comment. But the media loves someone who has a strong personality and can present well because they're good on camera, not good on camera, but you know what I mean? They're good chat to. And that's why when someone gets into the media, they invite that person back. So I think it would have definitely been noticed by the ALP that there was a woman, firstly, small business owner, who is speaking out against them. Now, as we know, in Victoria, Daniel Andrews and the ALP are very, very in touch with the media. So they're not going to like someone like me going up there and bursting their bubble. And it was when I did the third video, which is the one that got the 40 million, that went viral. And I can't, like, celebrities in the US were sharing it. It was wild. It wasn't just Australia, it went everywhere. And I did some media around it, and people, you know, like Rebecca Madden, who's the most disingenuous hack. I was so touched by your video. I had to talk to you. Is it Jamie Doran, the guy that's buggered up the Adele interview? He said the same thing, slid into my DMs. Oh, you know, you're amazing. You're saying everything we feel. I want to have you on what's his Weekend Sunrise, right? So, you know, my DMs were an interesting place, and I would never share what these people say in private. But I was like, oh, look, you care apparently. And then, sure enough, like clockwork, there was an ex-business partner who's disgruntled, who decided to publicly shame me for having a liquidated company, and neglected to mention that he was my business partner, neglected to mention that he had obtained those documents outside of private and confidential means. And all the lefties just ran with it. And then I was painted as a con woman, and someone had set up a GoFundMe in my name. And of course, that was me trying to pay back old debts. And it was actually wild. And it's only with hindsight I can look back and go, how the fuck did that happen? You know, it's like the most perfect storm. Like, it's Hollywood. That's what it was. And if it wasn't me, it would actually almost be a little bit funny. I'm like, wow, fuck, that was, you know, intense. And as you said about Anna Rose, like, I think there's a special level of savagery reserved for women in the media, particularly ones that we want to tear down. I mean, look what they do to Nadia Bartel. Look what they do to Delta Goodrum. Look what they do to Anna. Like, when it's a woman who has conservative viewpoints, you're fucked. Like, they just want to destroy you.
Definitely intense, and it was an absolute ride. And look, throughout that, obviously, you and me stayed in contact, and I was talking to you a lot through that, Fade. I felt for you. It was insane how they went after you, and the Channel 9, and it was crazy. So to see you come out of that the way you did, though, I thought was super inspiring, and I was really proud of you, because you obviously laid low for a little bit of time, which is just common sense. There's no point getting into going on Channel 9 or anything like that. But then you came out, you handled like a freaking pro, and then you just got back in the ring. Did you know you were going to do that, or did you just feel like it after it sort of settled down?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because when you're in the fire, all you can feel is the heat, right? So, you know, I knew enough that when you're standing in a stadium and people are screaming at you, there is no point saying anything because no one can hear you. So as you said, I laid low because I was like, whatever I say now will go on deaf ears. They want to hate me, so let them hate me, right? Let them get me out of my system. And then it was actually Nadia Bartel that kind of took the heat off me. She had that drug scandal. And then they were hating on her. And then Georgia Love came after me. And, like, you know, there was succession after succession. And I think it was about 5 weeks later, and as you can see, like, I'm someone with conviction, right? I clearly don't have an issue articulating myself, and I was like, I'll be damned if people think that you treating me so vilely will deter me from speaking up about what I know to be true. And my ex-business partner and all the people that attacked me, I was like, that's a one-sided view, and you're welcome to put your perspective out there, but I will never get in the mud with you. And this is the thing that I think a lot of people fail to recognize, particularly with social media. If you want to get into one of those social media wars, that's it. That's the level you stay at. If you want to be a pig, roll in the mud. You want people to hear you. You want people to respect you. You want people to take you seriously. Don't partake in that bullshit. And look, there was part of my ego that was like, put up these screenshots, put up these documents, set the record straight. But then I would have just been as bad as them. You know what I mean? And I was like, no, what we need now are people with loud voices who don't have a problem speaking up, get back out there and keep going. because fuck these people. This is what it's all noise. It's all distractions. They don't want their narrative to come undone. And there's a lot of people that have really attached their ego and, for lack of a better word, their brand to this narrative. There are people who build platforms about being pro-vax and, you know, all this sort of stuff. I'm like, that's an interesting wagon to hitch yourself to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw some of that as well. I mean, I saw a few videos where people were trying to actually make a point of slandering you. And I actually didn't see the initial video, but then I saw a video that got shared of a guy who was trying to debunk you or whatever. And then I went and saw your video. But I'm wondering, in hindsight, like you talked about hindsight before, but I know Andy knows what it's like, and I know what it's like to be smeared by the media and have your name rubbed through the mud. And for me, it gave you what I like to call fuck you energy, where I just sort of look back at it and I think that, okay, well, you know, you're not going to please everyone. You're only going to be able to please, you know, the people who you please. So I'm not going to worry about all of that external noise. So was there a silver lining for you along the way anywhere?
Yeah, there was. And look, you know, when you come out of that fire and you give it time, like the only thing you can do is give it time. And everyone hates hearing that in the moment because you're like, I want to fix it now. I want to fix it now. You have to sit in that fire, right? And it's a baptism of fire. And those of us who have spoken out, even, you know, I mean, look what's happening with Joe Rogan at the moment. And anyone who spoke out about this narrative, people have been absolutely destroyed over it. There's nothing you can do in this moment. You just got to breathe and just make sure you're okay, right? But as it sort of calmed down, as things started to dissipate, I know the truth, you know what I mean? And that's all I need to know. I know what's real. I knew what the truth is. And that then I was like, well, everything else is irrelevant. And energy is energy. If you harness that negative energy and push it back into negativity, that's where you'll be stuck. If you harness that negative energy and push it into something positive, you'll propel forward. You won't get stuck where you are and you won't stagnate. And that's what I thought. It was like my worst, it wasn't even a secret. People knew I liquidated. That wasn't a secret, but it just, the whole of Australia didn't know because the whole of Australia didn't know who I was. But now that you all know, sweet, cool, next. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know everything now. And weirdly, I feel liberated. And I know people don't want me to say that. People want to be like, you should be ashamed, you should be embarrassed. But name one successful entrepreneur who doesn't have failures under their belts. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Every person has failed. And this, I think, is the silver lining and the lesson that illustrated to me. People don't want to be associated with you or know you when you fail, but fuck, they want to be part of that success story when you succeed. We love an underdog once they've made it. So let's take it 10 years from now and, you know, maybe, who knows what will happen. Let's say I build this massive company again and I'm super successful. People be like, I was always rooting for her. She's amazing. You know, I've been following her since day one. But during this baptism of fire, oh, fuck, you're absolutely a piece of shit, right?
Yeah.
That's Australians. That's what we're like.
Yeah, it's a shame, and I completely agree with that. And did you find that people turned their back on you, or were you surprised at how many people stood by you? What was that like?
The people who out of that were people like you, Andy, which, you know, to be honest, you were a stranger at the time. There were people who were like, I've got a business. I know what it's like to have a struggling business. What the fuck? And oddly enough, people who were in positions of power, people who were quite influential, and a couple of celebrities were all like, nah, what they did to you is fucked. And, you know, I'll never tell names, I'll never share messages or anything like that. But the people who reached out to me were people I was like, whoa, okay, this is crazy. But my close friends turned their backs on me. And I don't think it was because they didn't want to support me. I think they just didn't want the heat on them. You know, one of my close girlfriends was just as outspoken as I was about the lockdown. And then, because she had a gym business. And then sure enough, as soon as I got smeared, disappeared. And I haven't spoken to her since. And this is someone I considered one of my best friends. And I think what it shows is that when it comes to a fight like this, you are putting a lot on the line. And there's some people that, you know, well, most people have like a boundary that they cannot cross. And for some people, they need to stay in their safe place, in their comfort zone. And as soon as they feel like, you know, they're outside of it, they'll pull back. And I think that's what happened. And I think that collectively we're seeing how many people, I don't want to use the word cowards because I feel like it's a really derogatory term, but it is cowardice. There's a lot of people who talk tough talk, but when push comes to shove and you got to walk the talk, a lot of people disappear, you know?
Very true, very true. And that the lack of loyalty, it's fucking disappointing, isn't it? It's really disappointing. But hopefully some good came out of it, and hopefully there were, a bunch of people that obviously, and I know there was a bunch of people that backed you and stood by you, etc. And thank fuck you're out of that now, which is terrific. And you're on to bigger and better things. But one of the things that I've talked to you a few times about is how many business owners and people reach out to you in your DMs with their stories, asking for help or just sharing where they're at. Have you heard some pretty tragic business stories from these small businesses in Victoria?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of the complexities of business are hard to sum up in a couple of sentences. And like I said in the beginning, if you haven't owned a business, you wouldn't understand the different levels of stress that you encounter as an entrepreneur. Depending what stage you're in, depending on the size of your business, there's so many different variables, right? And during the pandemic, different industries were impacted at different times and at different stages. And if you were a mum and dad shop, right? Like, let me just think of a random example. You got a cafe in CBD Melbourne, and you're used to having all of the corporates in the offices Monday to Friday. You're used to this turnover. You are maybe in a partnership, or maybe you're a sole trader, and you have a mortgage and 2 children at a private school. All of a sudden, your income's dried up. You can't pay your mortgage. You can't pay your kids' tuition. Now, your business is one of the worst hit, and it's hit the worst first. And so you're going through this while everyone else is sitting at home, loving it, wearing their trackies and doing their Zoom calls, right? And you're sitting there going, I don't know how to pay my bills. And then fast forward to lockdown 4 and 5, that business is gone. Those people have probably lost their home. Their kids are now going to a public school. Like, there's a lot of people whose lives got utterly destroyed. And then you've got people who were in big companies, right? Who were good employees working, let's take a Qantas employee. They've been laid off. These people have homes. They've got mortgages. They've got kids. Their lives are in utter turmoil. And that's what people don't understand, that the suffering was so disproportionate.
It really was. And one of the things that I think is a real shame is the lack of coverage that entrepreneurs, small business owners, etc., have had in the media. I mean, the stories haven't been shared. People don't really know what it was like, especially in Victoria, for a lot of the business owners and entrepreneurs. They really don't. And it's been a very intense time for entrepreneurs and business owners, and it really will continue to be for the next 12 months at least. Do you see the next 12 months being a little bit scary for a lot of these businesses, especially with the lease protection coming off in March?
I actually think that, and I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but I'm very realistic, and I think if you understand what's at stake here and what's going to unfold, then you can better prepare yourself for it. Sitting there and pretending everything's going to be okay is a waste of our time. This is going to be the year where push comes to shove, right? We've depleted all of our reserves. Staff capacity is, customer capacities are constantly being restricted, and there's all these different rules. And if you're vaccinated, you can go, and if you're not vaccinated, you can't, or maybe you can, now you have to wear masks. Like, all of these restrictions, whilst they seem like they might not be impacting, they are. That whole January period we just went through with the peak of the Omicron wave, and everyone was going down with COVID, these businesses couldn't open. They had no staff because they're all being thrown into isolation, and the isolation rules change from week to week to week. And what are we going to do now if Daniel Andrews mandates the 3rd booster? How much more workforce are we going to lose? How many more people are going to go, nah, fuck this, I've done enough. I did the 2, like you said, we're still restricted. I still can't travel. I still can't do this. You want me to get a 3rd and then a 4th? Go fuck yourself. And that's what I said when we opened up. Like, everyone's at different stages of that sort of threshold of going, nah, I'm out, I'm tapping out. But for businesses, with lease protections coming off and the lack of tourism, right? Like, Melbourne is dependent on so many different parts of our economy, being tourism and, international students in our universities. You've got people like Monash University, Melbourne University, Deakin University, who have gone 2 whole years of huge parts of their revenue completely dried up. International students pay almost 3 times more than an Australian student. That's all the money that then gets poured into all their research, what do you call them, students, like their PhDs, their staff, they're laying off people. And what does the government do? The Victorian government introduced a mental health tax and starts taxing those businesses whose revenue is driving up more fucking tax. Like, it's wild. And like I said, unless you understand business and unless you have a really broad understanding of the economy, you're not seeing this. You're thinking, oh, I'm still getting my paycheck, I'm okay. But you will be impacted. You'll be impacted because your favorite cafe is closing, or that can't open anymore, and we can't open at these hours anymore. We can't do 24 hours anymore. Like, I remember 4 weeks ago, when that wave was happening, I was coming back from somewhere, I think the Yarra Valley, and I pulled into Macca's on the Ring Road just to get my Coke no sugar. And and this is one of the busiest Macca's. It's on the friggin' Western Ring Road. It's always packed. It's 24/7. They had a sign saying, we can only operate 9 till 5. We do not have staff. Please bear with us. And I was like, this is one of the biggest Fortune 500 companies in the world, and they cannot staff one of their busiest stores. Wild. Fucking wild.
100%. Carlz, as someone who hasn't been to Melbourne for a matter of years, not because I didn't want to, but just because we simply couldn't, tell me what it's like, because you mentioned earlier that you've moved back into the city. So explain to someone who hasn't been to Melbourne for a long time, what does it actually look like when you go into the city? What do you see? What don't you see? What's the mood and the vibe down there as well?
So the thing that people know of Melbourne, it's a cultural hub, right? You come to Melbourne for sports, for food, for culture, and everything about Melbourne is like that inner city borough like vibe, right? I often compare Melbourne to New York, not in size, but just in vibe, right? Like, you go down this borough, you go into this suburb, you go down this alleyway, there's always a secret little cafe or eatery or boutique. And that's what we know about Melbourne. Plus all of our major sporting events. You've got the Grand Prix, the Australian Open, the AFL Grand Final, and then all the major music acts and all the big festivals, they're all in Melbourne. We haven't had that for 2 years. And again, this is all part of a bigger chain. With the CBD being completely devoid of any of the professional workforce, all of these apartment buildings, not apartments, all these office towers are empty. At the bottom of those office towers are businesses that support those workers. Cafes, lunch stops, like shoe repairers, watch repairers, they're all there to facilitate the people who work in the CBD and live that hustle life. So that's gone. So you walk around Melbourne CBD, it is empty. It's full lease. And these are businesses that were once thriving because there is so much foot traffic. You walk down Burke Street Mall, walk through into the Emporium, walk through to Melbourne Central, right? These are the biggest shopping malls in the city. They're empty. There's no people, and there's no people for a couple of reasons. People aren't coming into the CBD because they no longer need to. So they might, let's say you live in Werribee or Point Cook, or you're out in like Oakley, you'd go to Chadstone, or you'd go down to your shopping centres down there. Why would you come into the CBD unless it was proximal to where you worked? So that's people that aren't coming in. You've got no international students. So all the people that used to fill up the Docklands apartment complexes, they're gone. So who's going into the city to go and eat Thai food at one of those beautiful hole in the walls? No one. So they're empty. And these people, they're not just going, oh, you know what, we're going to call it, we're going to shut our shop. They went broke. These are people who probably signed a 5-year lease. They're people who had employees to pay. They've had all these commitments. Their business has dried up. They've depleted all their savings. They couldn't survive. They've closed down. And there are Melbourne institutions that have closed down during this pandemic. It breaks my heart. Some of the most well-known cafes. And you've got people like Chris Lucas, right? He's one of the biggest, most successful hospitality entrepreneurs. He owns Chin Chin and all those places. He is a very successful person. He's a millionaire, right? So you would think he's fine. But a millionaire can't stay a millionaire if all of a sudden their businesses dry up, right? Like, there's so many things at stake. And I'm not saying, oh, poor Chris Lucas, let's bleed hearts for him. He owns some of the biggest Melbourne institutions. And right now, I saw it today, actually, he's offering discounts at Chin Chin and Hawker Hall and all these places. These are places that people will come from all walks of life, all different states, all different countries. And they're like, we have to go to Chin Chin in Melbourne. It's world famous. Or we have to go to the National Gallery of Victoria because they have some of the most incredible art collections. Or, we want to go to the Australian Open and the Grand Prix. Who the fuck wants to come to Melbourne right now? No one.
Absolutely nobody.
I'd argue it's the Australian closed.
Definitely not. No, I actually used to work at Chin Chin for 2 years, just as a funny story.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Wow.
I was a little Chris Lucas waiter. It took me 7 months to get on the floor. Maybe that was because I sucked at my job. But another thing I was going to say is that the aesthetic of Melbourne's obviously changing, and the comparison to New York becomes more and more relevant when you say all of the shop fronts and the leasing that's going on. But the thing that changed the most about Melbourne for me was the attitude, because I always loved the attitude of Melburnians, and I always loved being in Melbourne. But when the pandemic happened, you could cut the tension in the air with a knife. Like, it was absolutely palpable in Melbourne. And there was so much of a divide. And I noticed this with the protests that were happening as well, is that I had a lot of friends on social media who were just making fun of them and the tradies. And then I was totally in support of the tradies and what they were doing. And there was sort of this like highfalutin, condescending sort of attitude to people who were protesting. And I found that really disturbing, because obviously it's a fundamental right of ours. And I was wondering, has that gotten any better? Can I come back yet for a holiday, or should I stay away?
Yeah, look, I'm an optimist, right? Like, as much as I'm a realist, I like to see the glass as half full. And I do think people have reached that threshold of giving a shit, right? Lockdown 1, everyone was on board because none of us knew what was going on. And people were thinking it's the Spanish flu, it's the bubonic plague, we're all going to drop dead, right? Even I was a bit like that in lockdown 1. Like, shit, this doesn't sound good, right? And then lockdown 2, bit long in the tooth, and everyone was like, this is fucked, like, this isn't fun. Lockdown 5, 6, what did we end up with? 7? I can't keep up. We get to that point and people go, all right, this is bullshit. And all the while, and this is the thing, right? Different things will wake up different people, and it all comes down to how you're personally impacted. In the beginning, most people weren't impacted at all. It didn't stop them. They were saving money. They were loving not having to do that, like, hour commute on the West Gate. There was Melburnians who were just like, oh my God, how nice is this working from home? And then all of a sudden they've got to deal with their kids and they can't get work done, all this stuff, right? So at different points, people reach their threshold of giving a fuck. With Melbourne now, you have got a polarization. And what we saw is, and we're seeing this now, right, with the people on the left, the people who have really attached their identities to what's going on. Anyone that disagrees with them, no matter how moderate you are, you're a Nazi now. Like, it's the extremism is crazy. And what I wish I could say to them, and what I wish they would hear, is that the more you push people down this extremist narrative, the more people you lose, because the average person doesn't want to be political. Like, Aussies are basically fairly apathetic for the most part. Both political parties are equally as bad as the other. They're both corrupt. They're both full of dickheads. That's the Australian way, right? But when you have all this shit unfolding, people get to a point going, wait a minute, well, I can't say this now. I can't wear that now. I can't do this now. Like, what the fuck can I do? Like, and that's where people are getting, because at the same time as all the pandemic, you've got all this woke shit, all this social justice shit, and people are like, I can't keep up. Everything's offensive, politically incorrect everywhere. Like, I don't know how to operate in this spectrum, right? And then people just go, nah, get fucked. Like, if you can get cancelled for saying the word guys, like when I say, hey guys, that's offensive now. If I get cancelled for that, fuck, I'm out. Do you know what I mean? And so anyway, to answer your point, because like I said, can chat. Melburnians, you got to think of it like PTSD, right? I think there's a lot of people who, if they were to truly listen to their gut and their intuition, they know something's up, they know things aren't right. And we're seeing this all unfold right now in Victorian Parliament, like a Labor MP crossed the floor yesterday. The wheels are falling off the wagon, so to speak. And I think people are just like waiting, like, whoa, what do we do? And Melburnians are like that. I'm seeing more and more people not wearing masks. People don't check in. People don't ask for your vax passport. And that's what it will come down to. It's that really little non-compliance that all of a sudden this sort of fades away. And I 100% believe We are seeing the dissolution of the ALP at the moment. It is imploding, but it's going to take a little while. And I think being an election year, Melburnians are going to have to undo some of that mental gymnastics that they've been through and trying to justify themselves. And that's uncomfortable. So, yeah.
I saw people that were actually, I would consider them totally and utterly institutionalized to the lockdowns towards the end of it, because I would even speak to friends from back home who are really switched on, but like they've just been beaten down by this system so much to the point where you talk to them and they say, so what, like you can just go to a cafe in Queensland? I'm like, yes, we can. That's because that's what you want to do as a normal human being in the world. But yeah, and like that really disturbed me. And then the fact that being all pro-COVID and pro juice, it was a virtue signal. And you know what happens when there's a virtue signal on the table? Everybody jumps on it like white on rice. So yeah, that was the thing that really disturbed me. And I'm really, really hoping that Melbourne does come out of this. But I guess the wheels are falling off, as you said. And as that starts to happen, the thing that I'm going to be really curious about is all of these, you know, vax crusaders and lockdown crusaders. What do they say when this is all said and done? And I'm not trying to put anybody in a box and divide at all, but I'm just wondering, when that happens, is there like, oh, well, we were trying to, you know, save lives at the time, or is it like a we were wrong situation? I doubt it, but what do you think?
I think, like, I'm going to be really careful using this analogy because I know it's going to upset people, but we need to make peace with the fact there will not be a massive reckoning. There will not be a moment where people lay down their swords and say, you know what, I was wrong and I'm sorry. That's not coming. And for all of it, it sucks to be right first, right? It sucks to be one of the people that started speaking out at the beginning, because there is no like kickback for it. There's no like, hey, you were right. I'm so sorry. All that horrible things I said to you, I take, like, it's not happening. So people need to be realistic about that. The reference I wanted to make, and I feel really hesitant to bring this up, but it is a really good time in history to point to, and that is a post-war Germany. I don't want to talk about the Holocaust. I'm not saying this is like the Holocaust, and I feel like I have to be really clear with that. What I'm talking about is post-1945, when all of those atrocities came out. The German people had to find some way to move forward, right? Like, you may not have been complicit in the fact that you were an SS guard, but you were a German citizen who stood idly by as 6 million Jews perished in the Holocaust. Now, what do you do? How do you function after that, right? That's what I want to talk about. So when you had the Nuremberg trials, that was just the top chains of command. What about all the other people who, you know, were running the Nazi shops and maybe making food for the Nazis? There were a lot of people. Did we expect that all of those people who had done wrong and who had been cruel, whatever degree it was, whether you just said something mean or whether you perpetrated something mean, were we going to just round up all those people and then just throw them into a gulag? It's not realistic, right? It's not going to happen. It didn't happen. Same with COVID. And that's why I thought it was really important to bring that up. The amount of people who have been on this bandwagon, the amount of people who attached not only their personal ego and their personal identity, but also their business or their brand. Think about the big businesses that are all pro-vax and putting things out there, right? NAB changed their name to Jack.
I know.
Cringe.
See that?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Well, literally, the logo.
Yeah, it's wild, right? And this is what I'm saying. We're not going to undo all that. We're not going to get apologies. These people aren't going to admit they're wrong. They're going to be like, no, it's now the science says it's okay. Now it's okay because the science says it is, right? Like, these people won't be able to, like, some might, right? Like, I have hope for a few people, and I think a few people have already started to go, but the average person, and particularly those who are on the far fringe of the left, there is no way they'll admit they're wrong. They're going to say, well, we were doing it to save lives. And that's it. That's their get out of jail free card. So those of us who are on the different side of it just need to make peace with that. There is going to come a point where you're going to go for a job interview and the person opposite you might have been one of those people that was an anti-masker, an anti-vaxxer, and you're trying to get employed with them. And that person is going to go, one moment, thanks, just do a quick Google on you. And they're going to be like, oh, You wanted all unvaccinated people to die. You wrote this in August 2020. I'm still unvaccinated. Do you still want me to die? Do you still want this job? Do you know what I mean? You got to be really careful because the pendulum always swings back, and people fail to see that. You look at history, any point in human history, whether they want to go all the way back to the ancient Egyptians or to ancient Rome, or you want to go back to Genghis Khan, or you want to go back to Ivan the Terrible, or even just in the 18th century, the pendulum always swings back. And that is why we have this beautiful thing called the silent majority, because most people are pretty moderate and go, you know?
Yeah, and as somebody who interacts with a lot of people on a daily basis, because I work in a gym, like I often try and seep in little like questions about their views on things. And often it's like, oh yeah, I don't really believe in mandates or whatever. So I think that is the extreme of thought, and if somebody is of that philosophical, ilk where they think everybody should be, the vax should be, not allowed anywhere and people should be locked down. And I think that's an extreme point of view to have. But yeah, as you said, though, it's a really good point about the historical context, though, because if you were living in Nazi Germany at the time, if you were living in the Soviet Union, or if you were living in Mao's China, the support wouldn't have been with the government. However, the silent majority was silent. People weren't, standing on the streets crusading for and just waving their flag for Mao to go and do whatever he wanted to do. And for the majority, Hitler wasn't as popular in Germany as what we might think by all of the videos of the screaming crowds when he was speaking. So yeah, it's an interesting analogy to make. But back on what we said before, as much as it would be nice to have people held accountable, I think that there is a select few people who do need to be held accountable. As much as, it would be good that if everyone turned around and said, okay, yeah, sweet, we were wrong. That's not going to happen. But in the future, I know we're not going to all sit around and start holding hands and singing John Lennon's Imagine together. But in the future, if we could have Dan Andrews at least turn around and say, hey, look, guys, okay, I was wrong, that would make me happy. A few politicians, please.
I think we are seeing the downfall of Daniel Andrews. And this is the thing. And, I'm ousting myself as a massive nerd here, but I am a massive history buff. And anyone who goes for that fundamental level of power, right, that all-consuming level of power where no one will speak out about you for fear of being ousted by the group, which is exactly what's happening with the ALP. Now, I'm not going to go as far as to say he's the next totalitarian dictator. He is certainly no Mao, right? Is he a megalomaniac? Absolutely. Is he Machiavellian? Absolutely.
Yes.
That's important to know, but I'm in no way saying that he is as extreme as those other examples. But the thing, when you push for that much power and you push for that much autonomy and that blanket across people, the chips eventually, the house of cards implode. They always do, right? Because people get sick of it. People like Adam Somurak, he was literally Daniel Andrews like lapdog. He was pushing all that branch stacking and factional shit. And he got done dirty. He got thrown under the bus because obviously you're not going to throw Daniel Andrews under the bus. And look what happens. The guy finds his balls. He's like, fuck, my political career is ruined. I'm probably going to face criminal charges. At the most, I've got an IBAC inquiry. What have I got to lose? And then yesterday, I cannot say her name. I'll butcher it, but we had the other ALP MP who got ousted and she won't be able to get pre-selected. She's like, fuck you guys, I've got nothing to lose. I'm crossing the floor. So we will see Daniel Andrews held accountable. It's already happening. It's just how long will it take? It sucks. I think at the very least, he will be tied up in either civil or criminal lawsuits for the next couple of years. I think he will be very much likely to leave the States. But who I'm more concerned about is fucking Fauci. Like, this guy did this in the 80s with AIDS. He's doing it again with COVID. The guy's 78 or 76. He doesn't have much time left. And this is the problem, right? He probably won't ever face the time. But people like him that we need to be like, wow. And I think when you talk about people being held accountable, what we want is the policies wound back, right? So you can take Daniel Andrews out. His pandemic legislation is still there. We need someone to come in, whether it's the ALP, whether it's a collection of minor parties or the Libs, wind all these laws back. Like, undo all this bullshit. apologize for these mandates. And I think we are going to see class actions. We're going to see royal commissions. Yeah, it's going to be wild.
It's a big point, that one. Actually, Jordan Peterson was talking about that lately, where he just says they keep on pushing till you say stop, but then they don't wind it back. And then people go back to normal and they push again. And then before you know it, you're at the other end of the extreme. Yeah. One quick question I do have, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, feel free not to answer it if you don't want to, but last week we had Topher Field on the show, and he said that if Daniel Andrews got re-elected this November, I think it is, down there in Victoria, he'd consider leaving. Do you have a point in time where you would consider leaving, or a set of circumstances where you would consider leaving? And if so, where would you go? And again, feel free, you do not have to answer that one. It is a very personal question.
No, I love it. I love it. Love it. No, look, has that crossed my mind? Absolutely. I had so many opportunities to go up to Queensland over the last 2 years. I've got friends up there and they're like, get out of Victoria. You can sleep on our couch. We'll figure it out. Just get up here. And I was like, no, get fucked. I'm not going to be chased out of my state by some megalomaniac. Like, I'm going to fight for this state. I'm going to stay here and fight. Do I have a threshold? Probably when they start building gulags. That might be when I think, let's not leave. But we're not going to get there. I don't think the ALP will go to the next election with Daniel Andrews. I think by that point, he is a PR disaster. Do I think the ALP will win again? I think so. But I think the upper house will be so stacked with independents that it doesn't matter. They're not going to get legislation through. So that's some peace of mind. When I say I'm an optimist, I am. I think it's really important to know where we can win and be realistic where we can't. I won't leave my state unless I have exhausted all options to fight for it like I have. And I mean, after what happened to me, that baptism of fire, that was probably a really good time to go incognito and leave the country. But I was like, no, you're not going to chase me out of my home. I'll leave when I want to leave. I understand why people have Plan B, and obviously I know Topher really well, and we talk about Plan B. Do I think Australia is going to descend into chaos like Venezuela? No. And I think the reason we won't do that is because as much as we are politically apathetic, people in Australia do have a sense of camaraderie, and that will ignite. And we are starting to see that. It has done it to a degree, but I think that will happen well before we see any terrible things happen.
Yeah, interesting. It's good. It's good to hear that, actually. I love your courage and the fight you've got there, which is absolutely fantastic as well. It's brilliant.
I just want to add this. I think it's really important, right? If you're going to die on a hill, right, and I'm dying on this hill that I'll fight for Melbourne. I think the mandates are wrong. I think we should need a royal commission. I think the ALP and the Liberal parties need to be dissolved. I'd much prefer to see a system like European Union where there's lots of minor parties and the legislation's a lot more difficult to pass and all those sorts of things, right? That's the hill I'm happy to die on. And if that's it, then I have to do everything I can to make sure that I see that through. Saying something and then running away with your tail between your legs, that doesn't help anyone. That's not conducive to any actual change. So put your money where your mouth is. And I think a lot of people can learn a lesson in cowardice. Look what apathy gets you. People talk a big game. They talk tough talk. Oh, no, that will never happen to me. I'll come get, and then they do. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah. That's what we did in COVID. Oh, big, bad, bloody colds come into the country. Oh, everyone just cowered. So that's something to keep in mind. And I mean, this is something I talk about all the time. We have gotten to a point where we are so protected. Everything's so safe that look what it's bred, weak people. And what's that? I know Jordan Peterson talks about this, or Joe Rogan talks about this all the time. Good times breed weak men. Mm-hmm. That's where we're at.
Yep, we totally are.
Yeah, especially Jake.
Yeah, I mean, I was just about to say, I actually feel like more and more of a pussy for leaving the state every week because Topher was telling me last week how he wouldn't leave, and now you wouldn't leave, and I'm just like that guy in the Titanic who jumps on with the women and children.
Mate, it's good living. It's good living in Queensland, though. That's for damn sure.
The weather is really nice up here.
That's right.
You know what? This could spectacularly blow up in my face. I could end up in a gulag next week. We don't know, but I mean, I'm optimistic.
That would make me feel a bit better.
I think we have webcams here in Queensland, don't we?
Just before we go, Carlz, I was going to say I'm really interested in to talk to you on an IG live soon, and I often ask our guests on dates.
Okay.
Our guests on dates to have an IG live. So can we have a history themed IG live at some point, me and you?
Absolutely, I'd love that. I'll really out myself as the dork I am, but
perfect. I'd love that. I'm a history buff too.
Something that I think is important, right? And like this is a bit of a tangent, but I think it's important to say, look at the value of the content that people are consuming right now. Like, you know, the biggest rating show on TV is Married at First Sight, The Bachelor. Like, we are consuming junk food mentally. And people have stopped learning about the Holocaust. People have stopped learning about history. They're disengaged. They think it's boring. I'd much rather learn who this like fucking blowfish looking face girl's cheating on this guy with. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and look at TikTok, look at Instagram, look at the content, OnlyFans. I'm watching a show at the moment called Euphoria. Have you guys seen it?
No, I've heard of it. I've heard of it. Yeah. Wild. It's like all about teenagers and how they're growing up now. And I'm just like, I'm so sheltered and whatever. But look at this is where we're at, right? And this is why I'm so outspoken, and this is why I speak with so much conviction about what I know. It's because if we don't have people making things like history cool, people will forget it. And as the saying goes, those who fail to remember history are doomed to repeat it. This is why we're here. You know, like this is the thing. If you don't take an interest in learning from our mistakes, you will continually and repeatedly make them.
Yeah. I know Andy's going to give you a good send-off, Carlz, but just before you go, I want to say that you are absolutely awesome. You have been so brave throughout this. Your IGs have been great. And great sense of humor as well. And I really look forward to seeing what comes for you personally in the future.
Thanks, mate. I appreciate that.
I couldn't do a better send-off than that. That was too good. That was too good. But Carlz, I'm gonna back that up. You are an absolute gun, and you've done such a fantastic job flying the flag, fighting hard as well in the face of criticism, adversity, and there's just been so many people that have been afraid to do what you have done, and you've shown really, truly what your character is like. And so I'm proud to know you. Keep fighting the good fight, and hopefully we have you on the show again soon.
I will just add, sorry, because I know I've talked a lot, but I just wanted to say that was a big part of me stepping back into the ring. I didn't want to be the example that deterred others from speaking up. I wanted to say that, you know what, the worst of the worst happened to me. I don't think anyone copped it as bad as I have. And I'm still going, I'm still fine, still working, still have friends. You know, like my life did implode. Yeah, it got a bit uncomfortable, but I didn't want them to make an example out of me. I refused. So I hope that my resilience inspired other people to feel like, you know what, it's okay. You will cop it, of course, we all have. But don't let that deter you. Follow what's right and follow what your heart says, you know.
Pressure creates diamonds, and you're an absolute diamond. Thank you so much, Carlz.
Thank
Have
you.
an amazing night, and we'll get you on the show soon.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the chat. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I'll email you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
See ya.